So, full disclaimer, the content we're looking at this week usually gets spread out over the course of at least 2 weeks. I'm jamming in a lot here, so if you feel like you still have questions, feel free to let me know and we can have a Zoom session where we just kind of chat about the material. So today we're looking at a huge issue in the contemporary world of children's literature, and that is diversity. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about what I mean by diversity. I know it's a buzzword that often gets used and substituted in for race. That's not all that's involved, though. What we mean is all those identities that sit outside the dominant hegemonic power structure. We're talking about anything outside that cisgender, male, middle class, white, Christian, straight identity set that acts as the kind of assumed baseline in so much of our media. So let's return for a minute to our literary experience Venn diagram. We talked a lot about the areas of overlap and about the engagement with the story world that occurs at the center when all those figured worlds overlap. What happens, though, when that overlap isn't there? What if the figured worlds of the author and the assumptions about audience and experience they've made in their writing isn't shared by the reader or the mediator? Essentially, there are two categories of possibilities: growth and disconnection. There are opportunities to grow when you're offered unfamiliar perspectives, especially when it comes to building empathy. However, we aren't looking at a scenario where everyone benefits equally. For readers who constantly see their figured worlds represented in literature, there is immense opportunity for growth when they are presented with literature that offers a new perspective. But what about those readers who only ever see someone else's figured world, who feel othered and neglected by the world of literature, and often by extension, the world of education? That's a scenario ripe for disconnection. It's easy to feel excluded, looked down on, and disenfranchised by a system that only ever presents the same hegemonic worldview. So, is it really the case that that's a problem? Let's take a peek at some statistics specifically related to race. No, this doesn't touch on every minoritized identity type, but it is one slice of the pie, and it's one that specifically relates to our novels this week. Of all the children's books published in 2018, 50% were about white protagonists, and another 27% were about animal, truck, or other anthropomorphized protagonists. That's 77% of literature for children. Only 10% were about Black protagonists, 7% about Asian protagonists, 5% about Latina or Latino protagonists, and just 1% about Indigenous protagonists. Those numbers are staggering. So why does it happen? A lot of it has to do with publishing and perceptions about the market. It's believed that books will only sell well if they appeal to a majority audience. There are other systemic difficulties as well, though. It's very difficult to break into the world of children's literature authorship, and those with class and race privilege are more likely to have the resources and connections to push through to the top. I usually assign a couple of articles to students written by famous children's authors Walter Dean Myers and his son Christopher Myers. But I'm just going to read some excerpts for you today. So, writing from the New York Times, Walter Dean Myers tells a story about how his love for reading slowly waned when he never saw characters like himself in the books that he read. He says, "Books transmit values. They explore our common humanity. What is the message when some children are not represented in those books? Where are the future white personnel managers going to get their ideas about people of color? Where are the future white loan officers and future white politicians going to get their knowledge of people of color? Where are Black children going to get a sense of who they are and what they can be? And what are the books that are being published about Blacks? Joe Morton, the author who starred in The Brother from Another Planet, has said that all but a few motion pictures being made about Blacks are about Blacks as victims. In them, we are always struggling to overcome either slavery or racism. Book publishing is little better. Black history is usually depicted as folklore about slavery, and then a fast forward to the civil rights movement. Then I'm told that Black children, and boys in particular, don't read." And his son, Christopher Myers, also wrote for the Times, and he offers an apt metaphor. He suggests that children see books less as mirrors and more as maps. He writes, "They are indeed searching for their place in the world, but they're also deciding where they want to go. They create, through the stories they're given, an atlas of their world, of their relationships to others, of their possible destinations. We adults, parents, authors, illustrators, and publishers, give them, in each book, a world of supposedly boundless imagination that can delineate the most ornate geographies and yet too often, today's books remain blind to the everyday reality of thousands of children. Children of color remain outside the boundaries of imagination. The cartography we create with this literature is flawed. Perhaps this exclusivity, in which children of color are at best background characters and more often than not absent, is in fact part of the imaginative aspect of these books. But what it means is that when kids today face the realities of our world, our global economies, our integrations and overlappings, they all do so without a proper map. They are navigating the streets and avenues of their lives with an inadequate, outdated chart, and we wonder why they feel lost. They are threatened by difference and desperately try to wish the world into some more familiar form. As for children of color, they recognize the boundaries being imposed upon their imaginations and are certain to imagine themselves well within the borders they are offered, to color themselves inside the lines. The worlds we see in children's books are some of our first opportunities to look outside our own day-to-day experiences. And when those views are limited to only one perspective, we all lose out. So a lot of you are going to be reading historical fiction this week, books written about historical events. I have mixed feelings about that. It's an unfortunate reality that most diverse literature, especially about race, takes place in the past. It tells stories of struggle and not of the familiar lived experiences that readers are going through right now. Does that mean that the books we're examining this week are bad? No, it's just that they aren't enough. We need books that explore all kinds of realities, and regrettably, your best examples of those kinds of books will come next week when we look at books that are often banned or challenged. This week's set of books, although mostly historical fiction, also play an important role, though. They are examples of what we call counter-storytelling. So counter-storytelling are those stories that counter the dominant narrative. So think for a second about the history lessons you had in grade school and middle school. Whose perspective was centered? Did you learn about pioneers and pilgrims? If you did explore the histories of indigenous people or look at the civil rights movement, was it through the lens of, but everything is better now? 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, the answer is probably yes. The stories we're reading this week provide counter-stories to the ones that are often centered. They center the lives and realities of minoritized groups, and they add dimension and struggle to the often oversimplified histories we learn. So as you explore your assigned novels this week, pay attention to the cognitive dissonance that you're experiencing. What is brand new information for you? Why might it be important to provide counter perspectives? How does it change the way that you view history? Now, lastly, I want to touch on a popular buzzword in the field right now. It's often used as a hashtag, own voices. So own voices literature includes those books that don't just offer counter perspectives, but those that are written by authors who are part of the minoritized group being represented. I've highlighted all own voices authors this week who are writing about the lives and histories of their own people groups and histories. So as you're reading, think a little bit about why that might matter. Again, there are so many ways we can explore this in greater depth, and I'm going to post a page in this module with additional articles, chapters, and resources you can explore, especially because the book you read this week and the ideas you have will be part of your final project. Don't hesitate to reach out if you want to think through this with me. I'd be more than happy to host a group conversation on Zoom about the material. For now, though, I'm signing off. As always, read with a critical eye this week, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say.